What's up, everyone? Welcome to Financial Clarity Live. Excited today, brought to you by Sustained CFO, myself, Josh Notes, my partner, Phil Maffey, and our great team member, Augie Manzella. Thank you guys for joining me today. So we're going to jump right in. We got an action-packed 30 minutes. Again, welcome to Financial Clarity Live. We're here today to transform the way you think about your business, okay, and the business finances. This isn't just numbers. This is about clarity, strategy, and taking control. So over the next 30 minutes, we're going to demystify the financial planning process, show you why FP&A matters and how it can unlock your business's true potential. Together, we're going to cut through the noise, focus on what matters, and arm you with the tools to help make you smarter and make sharper decisions. So think of this as LinkedIn Live financial theater. It's a backstage pass to actionable insights that are going to fuel the growth and the future-proof your business. Because at the end of the day, financial clarity drives success. Okay, so let's dive in. So, Phil, you are our corporate finance guru in the house, and today we're talking about what in the FP&A. So, I wanted to have some fun with the title today. Why does this matter so much, and what's going to happen if I, the business owner, ignore FP&A as the buzzword of 2025?
You never cease to amaze me, my friend. So FP&A, right? Financial planning and analysis. So I was talking to one of our bookkeeping partners earlier today, and from our perspective, this is the last piece of your financial operations puzzle that you put in place that really enables scale and taking the business to the next level. Whether that means raising funds, making a big time exit, when you look to make that next kind of hurdle jump, this is the piece in your finance stack that you need to add on if you don't already have, because it's going to give you all of the reporting, analysis, detail that you need to be able to make good decisions and kind of take things to the next level.
Okay, so awesome. You're talking about the planning side, obviously the analysis as well. Augie, you bring your view, your lens into the world, really dissecting these businesses and turning the numbers into the narrative. Can you just give, what you learned in the past decade about what FP&A can do to a business and what will happen if it doesn't have it?
Well, basically, I'll start with the second question. If it doesn't happen, you're leaving a lot on the table, because as you scale, there's a lot of things that can be brought in and tightened up. And if you're not aware and you're like, oh, I know I have money coming in and I know I can pay the bills, then, you might be leaving a decent amount on the table.
Awesome.
And, basically, I think once you have like a proof of concept and you're rocking and rolling and you're bringing in money, that's when you start to think about this kind of thing, because, hey, if we keep going at the same pace, this is what it looks like. If we drop down, if we raise up, and then that gives you a lot more leverage and a lot more flexibility in making your longer term plans, like your 5-year plans.
Great. I appreciate you kind of pulling back the scope and helping us, think about time and scale in the scheme of things, right? Because I think every business owner that's deep into the business is working on it every day, thinking about it every day. Hopefully, they take a little time off, maybe on a weekly basis, but mentally, otherwise, it's there. And I guess, Phil, how does FP&A and the roles and the functions of it, if they're played correctly, how does it allow the business owner to elevate? Can you tell me how I'm going to elevate if I plug this into my business?
Sure. So, for us, it's all about the bottom line and cash flow planning and being able to allocate resources accordingly to achieve these long-term objectives, right? Whether it's a hiring plan or a marketing budget or whatever it may be, we're helping our clients manage that balancing act of, investing in the business, maintaining enough cash flow to operate the business, and doing these things in tandem so that, we're getting the best of both worlds, where, we're making sure we're bulletproofing ourselves against worst case scenarios and, things that all of the myriad of things that any business owners knows that can go wrong and, be cash flow issues. But at the same time, identifying those areas that are the most productive to make investments. And, all of us are trying to, kind of achieve those long-term goals. And we start with that end in mind and back into, what the most efficient return on investment would be to get from point A to point B, right? All the while making sure that we manage that bottom line, and the business doesn't run out of cash, and we're able to continue operating, fighting the fight, and making those good things happen. So there's a lot of clarity and insight that comes along with getting into this rhythm, and I talk to our clients about it all the time, where you're in the financial operations cycle and process, right? Where you're closing the books in a efficient, timely manner. You're deriving insight from what happened versus what you thought was going to happen, and then you're spending some time taking that new information and projecting to the future, in a detailed fashion in the short term, and then taking the implications of what that means for your longer term objectives, right? So we like to start with the big picture in mind, and not be super tied down to how we get from point A to point Z, but we're going to be really focused on how do we get from point A to point B to point C in the near term. That's still in line with that longer term objective. So long run.
And I like the way you frame this out. Is it's not like this isn't a task that you're picking up or a project. This is a business habit, and you need to ingrain it into your business culture in order for it to operate. And when the business is tested, either with growth or challenges, this may be the make it or break it function and habit that you develop. So we talked about the roles: forecasting, budgeting, variance analysis. We're going to dive into each one of those. So I'm going to keep us moving here with 30 minutes on the block. But you can't have one really without the other. I think budgeting and forecasting a lot of times get either mishmashed together or kind of compared, like you should have one or the other. Phil, can you give me a thumbs up, thumbs down? Do you agree that they both have a role and they exist to be here as a role? And if you're going to have proper FP&A?
I will agree that is a point of confusion for a lot of people as to what is the difference between a forecast and a budget, right? So I think in the most simplest way of putting it, your forecast is a living, breathing, fluid process where you're constantly refining it with the most rigid assumptions and the best information that you have. Your budget is a point in time target. Budget to me often denotes really just expenses, right? So you're kind of saying, hey, I've got a project, I'm trying to launch a new product, or I'm trying to hire a bunch of people. I've got some amount of money I'm going to allocate towards this project, and this is my budget for this project, right? So you got to think about it as I'm going to go grocery shopping. I've got a $300 budget, and I got to stick to my budget to make this thing happen. Versus a forecast, which is where we live and breathe, in the sense that it's this monthly process, like you alluded to earlier, where it's a habit that we get into of constantly refining our assumptions and making sure it looks good, right? So a budget may be useful if you have investors, and we think about things a lot of the time where we draw a line in the sand, communicate some number to an investor. This is a great time of year for this, right? Our 2025 plan for next year is whatever it may be. Our investors are going to remember us saying that in December when it comes to June, July, and the end of next year, right? And that was, kind of how I think about a budget, where it's this static number that we're going to compare back to, because that's a line in the sand where we set a goal for this year or whatever it may be, versus our forecast, which is this, fluid, kind of constantly refined with what's happened so far this year, right? Or whatever our time frame is, and then what's going to happen in the future that we're trying to project. So, it's that's how I draw the line, I guess, and I think how I like to think about.
All right, and then a very important part is what you said, like you just said, what you said versus what actually happened. Augie, you lead the way on that. In our organization, when it comes to the analysis of the variance, I guess frame this up as far as how this fits into like a way that a business owner probably is already doing this, but they maybe don't have a process or a habit formed around it.
So definitely, especially as a business grows and there's more to keep track of, everyone has their sort of, back of the envelope math. And most of those ideas are already accounted for in the larger, financial forecasting methodology. So it helps, if you're involved with something like this, to be able to not create a tangled knot right off the beginning. It puts you in a position to kind of standardize what you are already doing, so that as you grow and there's more, pieces to the puzzle, there's more things to get confused about. That everything is on a solid foundation. That these assumptions that you used to do in your own personal way are now in a way that anyone could come and pick up your report and know what you're talking about. They don't have to have a sort of Rosetta Stone into your thought process.
So 15 years ago, I'm running a business. This is true story, and we're doing a couple $1 million for the first time in an annual cycle. And I noticed that when I'm driving around, constantly my brain is just doing math problems in not really an organized fashion about cash flow to make payrolls, to make the next inventory run. And I had this background in this discipline, but I naturally my brain as the entrepreneur just went in that direction of like basically trying to avoid risk without much of a process around it. So I can just imagine how that plays out over time, how much time is spent in that brain space and where that time could be repurposed. And also, like you said, tying you up in a knot where financials become this kind of contentious thing that you have to wrestle with that you don't enjoy because it's not delivered to you in a clean way that allows you to just step up, be strategic, and from the 30,000 foot view, make decisions. All right. So perfect segue, strategic decision making, data driven decisions. We believe the future will not only be driven by that, but the decisions may be made without as much human intervention. So I guess when we look at the future of decision making in a business, Phil, like what are people doing if they don't have FP&A? How are these decisions getting made? And how could they get comfortable and just say, okay, let me just pretend for the next 4 minutes, if I'm listening to this anyways, that I did have this team in place and I'm going to make my decisions in a different way going forward next year. What does that change look like in their life, in their business?
I guess, kind of tagging along on the example you gave of just, constantly thinking about it in a way that doesn't feel like you have any kind of organized structure. And really at the core of what we're doing is providing a framework from within which you can make these decisions, right? You're going to be able to do so with the best data you have available to you as of any point in time, right? So that's the element of what we're trying to instill here, and going back to this being a process where we're constantly instilling this discipline that enables us to always be in a position to make the best decisions we can with the current data available to us. And we're constantly keeping our fingers on the pulse so that we're really aware when, things are changing, what we can stay nimble and we can make decisions that enable us to be, we do this in our business all the time, where, if we know something's coming down the pipeline, we adapt to it, right? So it's all about not being surprised and being able to see that runway between where you are and where you're trying to go and all of the hurdles that are in between. And then, as business always happens and it's never going to play out like you predict. I always say this to our clients. I've done this for a long time. I've never walked into a forecast variance review where we all said, hey, you know what? It just happened exactly like we thought it was going to. See you next month, right? Like that's not the way this works. But to have a framework within which to have discussions, make sure we're all on the same page, right? That's really the key to it. And, that's what we bring for our clients is that forum where the leader's vision from a financial perspective is very clear to all of his people who are accountable to the various components of what that is, right? So you've got your marketing person who's responsible for their component. You've got the sales team. You've got all of your back office. If those folks are aware of how their piece fits into the broader whole, especially from a P&L on a financial perspective, right? You're in a position to really elevate your business because now everyone's marching in the same direction and understands what those expectations are and how we're performing against them, right, at any given time. So I just think there's a lot of power in that piece of things.
Yeah, you reminded me the way you talked about that. I got a post that's coming up about a pretty trying time in my world 6 years ago where our office for our energy headquarters got flooded. It was, on national news. And I talk about like we cleaned up literally dirt and sludge for, a weekend. And the first thing that we gathered back to, it wasn't our computer. It wasn't, our custom in-house software or our data. It was our forecast. That's literally, got the team together, huddled at 9:30 a.m. and we got back on a forecast and said, okay, life just changed for us very quickly. What's that mean? How are these timelines regarding performance, regarding hiring, regarding capital raising? How are those going to change? And you know what you said, the decisions that we came up with that day weren't perfect, but it got us another month down the road, another quarter down the road, and allowed for the organization to evolve. Augie, I want to get your take on, there's decisions that you make and you'd love them to be right, but then there's ones that are not going to be right or wrong. They're just going to be close, let's say. And a lot of times you dig in and try to figure out the why using, your skill set. How do you think, to somebody who doesn't have that support today, what would that feel like for them if they had somebody that when they make a decision or they're about to make a decision and they want to see 2 or 3 sides of the coin and they come to somebody like yourself, how quickly could they expect an answer? And, how do you think that might make their confidence change when it comes to making that decision and the timeline around that?
Well, I think for just a one-off sort of stat, that could be almost instantaneous. For something a little bit more involved, maybe a couple of days. But it seems like, obviously you're at the helm, and so you don't have necessarily the outside perspective. You're literally on the inside looking out. So that can muddle your decision making because you're not seeing necessarily the full picture. And so having someone that's on the outside who's looking for cracks and looking for, places where things aren't necessarily as shored up as they could be, it could help you avoid making a problem you're not even aware of worse, to the point where maybe it's a lot harder to bounce back from. If you have, people essentially looking for cracks in the foundation, then you're a lot more likely to be in a position to take action on something that might be small, but, those increments, right? Death of
right.
a thousand.
You don't need a big crack in the foundation to take down a building, especially in an earthquake. All right, let's talk positive, okay? I'm going to shake things up here. So today we're talking about a case study from our past. We've, slightly edited names and characters, but otherwise the story is true. Vandelay Legal Services, growing technology-enabled legal business that had been at it for 15, 20 years. When they met us, they were thinking about changing over the controller position. They thought, hey, I need a new controller, maybe something close to a CFO. We came in. Phil, you led the team that implemented FP&A and CFO services, as well as M&A services. Talk about the 21 months. What impact did it have on the business, and how did the decision-making, confidence, everything else we just discussed, how did that come together for the owner? And then, we'll talk about the champagne in a minute.
Yeah, I mean, right, everyone's got their big grand vision of how they see themselves riding off into the sunset, right? And we deal with this with our clients all the time, and we like to say is like, if you're trying to sell your business, talk to us 5 years before, not in this case, right, 21 months or whatever it wound up being. But I think the crux and the core of, kind of tying everything together and kind of picking back on what Augie was just talking about in terms of, I don't like to think about it as a negative thing, right? Is like, you need somebody who has a sense of perspective around things that, you don't have, and you need to listen to them, right? So in this particular example, the financial operations organization just wasn't structured properly, especially if the main goal being an exit is to increase your multiples and valuation as high as you can. The first thing we did is came in, benchmarked this organization, and then, saved them a significant chunk on their financial operations stack, which ultimately just wound up increasing the valuation and enabled them. We're literally, the only folks still working with this company along with the owner in the post M&A transaction world. So, we've kind of ingrained ourselves in the details of, what kind of went into this whole process. But, what we were able to do with our tools and with our processes is really give the owner a sense of what is this business worth what is it going to be worth, right? We always tell our clients is depending on the trajectory dictates, what your valuation is and what that multiple looks like when you wind up selling. If you, try to take things to market today on December 4th, you're selling your business by next December 4th if you're lucky, right? By the time all the dust settles, and a lot of folks
Right.
think, I'm going to wipe my hand of this.
Not to
you got to
mention,
sprint through that next 12 months, right? It's going to be the hardest 12 months you put in this whole time, because you got to really put it, it's two jobs. It's running the business and it's selling the business. And you got to make sure that you're doing both really well.
And then, to your point about running through the finish line, a lot of these deals we're seeing have earnouts that extend years beyond, that ultimately ends up making up a giant percentage of what you end up taking away to walk off the mountain. And so if you don't trust that process, that accounting process, resentment builds. You don't get the money you think you're owed. Maybe it never shows up. So, it's extremely important, if you're handing over your business to someone else, that the accounting infrastructure and the finance infrastructure is tight, not like you said, right when you want to exit, but be helpful to happen a couple of years in advance. I guess we're going to, Augie, dive into this in specific around some of the businesses, again, not by name, but that you've seen this time of year, strategic planning, budgeting. This is a hot topic. When you look at how an organization is going to think about an annual budgeting process, and then how they're going to think about their forecast, if we only had their attention for 2 minutes, can you guys kind of do a little lightning round, go back and forth on, kind of like, if you only had so much gunpowder to go after this, what can you do between now and Christmas as an organization that can maybe get together for 2 or 3 hours and just put something down on paper to organize yourself? How would you go about that? If you have a couple hours of your time, Phil, a couple hours of your time, Augie, go.
All right, maybe I'll start. I'll let Augie pick up where, I involve him in a lot of this. It's contrary to how we normally operate, because this, again, going back to the whole idea of this being a process, and that being the key element of, you're able to continue to do this in an efficient manner time and time again, right? So when you're thinking about this, and a lot of people get trapped in the, I took me forever to organize all this information and build a Excel spreadsheet, and then me and my partner, we just dug into this thing, and it took a really long time because we didn't have everything organized, but it was good exercise, and we find this stuff takes a really long time. But from an efficiency perspective, I would start with gathering all the information that I have available to me, and then figuring out a way, whether it's QuickBooks, kind of talking to a bookkeeper, whatever it may be, to really organize all of your financial information in a way that you can then use that as the foundation for these predictive models and forecasting and cash flow, right? It's a house of cards if you're not working with real world data with where your business has been within the last 12 months, within the last 6 months, even the last 3 months. So, I think that's where I would start, is, kind of gathering all of the information you have available to you. AR aging, AP aging, P&Ls, balance sheets, right? Taking that snapshot and kind of figuring out, where am I today, so that I can launch off from this point in time where I am. So with that being said, I guess, how would you think about going through that, or, the basic blocking and tackling?
I would say that how far we could get in a short period of time is ultimately dependent on how complicated the base scenario is, right? So depending on how many different entities are stacked, or how the original accounting team was operating, that is the overall determinant in how far we're going to get, how fast. But given the average, you can get in say 60 days time, you can get from, completely in the weeds, rough ideas based on old numbers, to, a nice ballpark, for sure, for, I would say, 60% of clients.
Yeah. And I thank you for bringing that back up, because, we do this, right? This is our onboarding process. In 90 days, we guarantee that we're going to help you figure out what your economic North Star is. Then we're going to help you build a bottoms up, forecast that drives in the direction of that North Star. And we're going to take 2 to 3 cracks at it over the first 3 months. And if we're not meant to work together, like you said, we probably will sniff that out before we onboard, but we'd love to, take that challenge on, because what we think is that any business that's organized with their finances has an opportunity to see the future of what their business is going to look like. But you got to do this work. And so you guys are giving an honest take, which I appreciate, that this can't happen overnight, but you can take major steps. So at least you have an idea, let's say heading into the new year, of what next quarter might look like. And then January, this is something that you can pick up again and look at again and say, how did we do? That's the variance analysis. A financial analyst or somebody with an analytical mind should lead that process. And the more perspective they can bring, as you said, Augie, will create the space for clarity and decision making. All right, so let's say it's January now, right? I got lean. I looked at this stuff on December 5th. I'm like, oh my gosh, I now know what our business kind of looks like with 15 days to go. We finished the year, and now I want to do my first comparison. Augie, walk me through. This is the first time an organization is getting together. What's the best way for that to work so everybody's not pointing at each other and arguing over a spreadsheet on a small screen?
Well, the way we tend to do our meetings, we have a number of tools that kind of creates an outline and a scheduling, and that helps just make sure that the meetings touch all the key bullet points. I think that's a huge help. We have a lot of things that are in like a template form. So it's part of the onboarding process where people can kind of just fill in the blanks, and that kind of creates a standardization even before any of the numbers are really crunched. So when you're sitting down for those first couple times, it helps everyone get on the same page, because everyone might have their own way of thinking about things, and even maybe down to just terminology where it's like, oh, I was using this term in this way. And, the process that we funnel through, it helps bring everyone to a consensus.
Apples to apples instead of apples to oranges. All right, Phil. So if the analysis is done, teams got around it, what does basic reporting look like? And then what does big boy reporting look like? Or we'll even say corporate finance reporting for small business, which is what we provide. You've helped really create and bring the best in the class right down to size.
Right on. I'm kind of picking up where Augie was leaving off with, our objective isn't necessarily accuracy as being number one, right? Number one is always going to be a collaborative nature to this and an insight that drives decision making. So, like I was saying, alluding to before, it's like we've never had a forecast review where there was zero variance as to what we thought was going to happen. That's not the way the real world works. But what really does work is everybody being aware of what happened, driving ownership and an accountability to making changes where needed based on this information. And so, this FP&A reporting is just one of those tools in the tool belt where it enables us to give the right decision makers the information they need to know, are they on budget? Do they have, things, the metrics that they're looking for, are they where they need to be? And if not, having the decisions with who can make the right changes to get them where they need to go. So, that's this kind of how this reporting element of this works, where it's almost the cherry on top, where you do all the really good work, and then there's an output to this. And kind of to what Augie was alluding to, there's a standardized nature to this output where everyone's on the same page. They're looking at the same report with the same numbers. There's no finger pointing. Everyone owns their piece of it, and they're able to explain what's going on with their piece of it, right? And it's like, we don't care if it's right or wrong. We just want folks to understand what's going on, to own and be accountable, and then the sum accumulation of that is the forecast, right? It's like, it's going to flow, it's going to be what it is, but you're doing it right. If everyone knows what's going on, they're holding their piece accountable, they know what the expectation is, and that's what makes this process work, and that's what ultimately unlocks the value of driving your team towards a common financial goal.
Yeah, and to a lot of different departments, it also reduces a lot of drama, because you don't have to hold people accountable if the numbers are holding them accountable. But if you don't have a system that does that, people do all sorts of wild things, and you spend a lot of time chasing that down and trying to whack performance back in line with what your objective is. But really, it's because the accountability is not there with a really objective way to compare that. So, we play that advisory role. It can be played internally, but it with any strategic relationship, if they're too internal, it's very difficult to also provide outside perspective. But as you mentioned, Phil, bringing the teams together around this, not making finance some sort of mystical, magical ball that everybody's guessing about, but using transparency and sunlight to be the best disinfectant for the truth of what's going on in the business. Let's talk about some questions we get. We got a couple minutes left here. When we have these conversations with the folks month in, month out with the clients, and they're trying to, say, well, look, these reports don't change the business, fix the business, improve the business. It comes down to decision-making. What role does an analyst play? What role does the CFO play in kind of forcing that hand, or at least pointing at it and saying, I'm going to be here next month, and I'm going to ask you the same question. So if the same answer I get, then one of us is going and saying, like, how do you play that role gently, but at the same time make sure it gets done?
And I think I'm going to pick up on a point Augie made earlier, where there's a lot of times where a lot of our clients don't know what they don't know, right? So kind of all circles back to that element of perspective and being able to, poke at things and doing it in a way that's productive, right? And from a perspective that, a lot of our clients don't often take. And, kind of like you were alluding to earlier, like the numbers don't lie, right? It's an objective way to analyze your business and to hold folks accountable, where if you have a salesperson and they're not performing, if you don't have a target for them that they didn't meet, how can you tell them they're not performing, right? It's kind of basic stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like to be able to quantify and be objective ultimately allows us to make, decisions in a way that aren't, loosey-goosey in a certain way, right? So, that's, I think, a lot of our meetings. And it's like, sure, the reports are the benchmark by which we're managing and measuring the business, right? There's a certain expectation we're setting, and we're trying to evaluate, did we or did we not meet that expectation? So if you're not setting it, writing as old guys I used to work with, put it on a piece of paper, make it real, as you like to say, Josh, right? And then that becomes a line in the sand that gets drawn to a certain respect that we all can say, hey, we knew the target this year was X. We're on track. We're ahead. We're behind. Like, without first initially drawing that line in the sand, how can you objectively, benchmark yourself to it? So, it's you can say it's a mental exercise, but like at the end of the day, like, to be able to make something happen in the future, that doesn't currently exist today, is inherently a mental exercise that the more objectivity that you can lay around, which ultimately drives accountability and, all of the good things you're looking for to, achieve those goals, right? Kind of harping on the same points, but it really does come down to kind of laugh. It's like, if you're not getting regular reporting and you don't know how to read it, and you don't know ultimately, the most importantly, what it's telling you relative to, like you alluded to, we start with what that big picture is. And if your reporting can't tell you, or you don't know that it's telling you you're either driving in that direction or you aren't, we're not doing our jobs, right? Because that is it is the way to, it's the report card. It's the way we're assessing how well we're doing versus how well we want to.
Yeah, we talked about the analogy of driving blindfold at night in a car,
right.
Or looking out the rearview mirror and driving forward. Looking forward, next week we're going to be focusing on financial statements, and you talked about what our clients say is, I didn't know that. We're going to talk about the key reports that you need to know. Augie, if you had to pick, you can't. It's like me asking about my children. If you had to pick one financial statement, you only get to keep one. Which one would you keep?
Oh, man.
One of my favorite interview questions to ask when I was hiring kids out of school. You go
like that?
Which one's the right one?
What's the right answer, Phil? What's the right answer?
I was going to say on sheet personally, but
I tend to. It's a trick question. It's to be able to defend your answer is the most important thing to asking that question.
There we go.
But I think we'll leave it at the cash don't lie, right? Cash is effect. So, anything that's telling me what the cash position is something I need to know.
All right. So
bottom line is the most important one.
That's right. All right. So at Sustain CFO, our focus is three things: help you with financial clarity first and foremost, right? With that visibility is going to come clarity and confidence in that decision making, and then from there you're going to be able to measure your march or your performance towards your economic North Star. So that's what we do here. We'd be happy to meet with you, through any of our social channels to discuss that and how that relates to your business. As for my guests, Phil Maffey and Augie Manzella, I just want to say thank you for participating. For everybody out there on LinkedIn, thank you for joining us. Next week, we're going to be focusing on financial statements, the key reports you need to know. Planning on doing that next Wednesday around 3:30 p.m. Eastern. And check us out on LinkedIn and YouTube later. Thank you so much. Take care.
Have a good one.
They're on.